spinning chairs.
Thank you.
Oh, to me, it's had to look.
Shall we begin? So thanks for coming, and thanks also for those of you joining us online on what is the last seminar of this term. There'll be another couple in the first half of next term. So the speaker today is, I'm pleased to tell you, Professor Jeff Spinner-Halev of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Thanks for joining us, Jeff. Jeff is the Kennan Eminent Professor of Political Ethics at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He received his BA and PhD from the University of Michigan. He teaches courses on political theory, philosophy, politics and economics, and on the ethics of peace, war, and defense. Couldn't be more suited to our times, Jeff.
Yes.
He's the author of The Boundaries of Citizenship, Race, Ethnicity, and Nationality in the Liberal State, Surviving Diversity, Religion and Democratic Citizenship, and Enduring Justice. And he's also co-editor of Minorities Within Minorities, Equality, Right, and Diversity. And he has many books, chapters, and journal articles, and so on. His most recent book, co-authored with Elizabeth Theiss-Morse, is Respect and Loathing in American Democracy. You can see that on the slide, because in fact, it's the basis for our talk today. So thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to your talk, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Let me talk about the cover for a minute. So when I first got a copy of the cover from the publisher, I didn't know what to think. I thought there's no way we could actually use it. So I asked a bunch of my friends, and it turns out that if you're over 50, it's 50-50 whether you like it or not. And if you're under 50, it's 95% chance that you do like it. So I took a survey of my class. Lauren, do you
I think it's good, yeah.
Yeah, see, there you go. I took a survey of my class of 35 students, and 93% of them or something said it was great. And my graduate students said it as well. So I decided that I would overcome my views, and as well as do my co-author. And so we began the book. So we said yes to the cover. So I'm going to talk about the motivation of this project. I'm going to say first a couple words about myself. So I'm a political philosopher. I've always been interested in political institutions. I don't do empirical work, or I did not do empirical work, I should say. I'm going to sort of like rephrase that. And after the 2016 election in the United States, I was struck by how many of my friends came up to me and said, when will Donald Trump get impeached? And my answer was, the Republican Party actually controls the Senate and the House. They're actually not going to impeach a president of their own party at that moment. And then I was having lunch with someone who said, Jeff, I believe in respect, but I can't respect anyone who voted for Donald Trump. And that was my moment of crystallization for this project, which is that I thought, that's interesting, right? Like, can you really not respect half of the people in the country who disagree with you? What does that mean for democracy? So at the time, I thought has to be more than a political theory project. It can't just be abstract. I needed data. I needed to know people thought. And there was also several books that were very popular in America at the time. I don't know if they've crossed the ocean. A book by Arlie Hochschild called Strangers in Our Land, and a book about the politics of resentment, and another book on Hillbilly Elegy, and they all looked at conservative voters. And they all, the two that I knew the best, talked to conservative voters. And so I thought I wanted to do focus groups, which I've never done before, to talk to people. And so I called up my friend, Elizabeth Theiss-Morse, who's a political psychologist and a former colleague of mine. And I said, Beth, I want to do focus groups. I don't know how to do them. Let's do this project together. And she said, that's great, Jeff, but we also have to do surveys. And I said, why? And she said, because focus groups, I said, these people, Housechild and Crenshaw just talk to people, they didn't do surveys. And she said, that's the problem with their book. You know what those people think, but you don't know if that's representative in any particular kind of way. So she said, that's fine, let's do it. She said, I'm in my last year as associate dean. And then, next year I'll have lots of time. That turned out to be not true, because in March, at the end of March, their dean resigned, stepped down. And so she became interim dean for the next year. And what that meant is, we did a lot of focus groups because I actually loved doing them, and Beth didn't tell me to stop. And I'll get to in a minute to how many we did. And it also meant, so it meant that I was much more involved in the empirical end of the project than I thought I would be. So we constructed the surveys together. I did most of the focus groups, although she did some of them. And I'll talk a little bit more about the methods. If you have very specific questions about the quantitative analysis, I will not be able to answer questions. But I was involved in the construction of the whole book. The whole book is actually a little more empirical than I anticipated in the beginning, but that's the way it goes. So the focus groups that we did were fascinating, and I'll just give you, I don't need to read it, I'll just give you a few seconds to read it yourself. Oh, maybe I should read it actually. Even as old as I am, I'm having trouble sorting out the intellectual side from the emotional side. And I wonder, can you intellectually respect people and emotionally not respect them? I wish that stuff that Trump does hurts them so that they'll say, wow, I made a mistake, that they lose there. And it's awful. I know, I hate myself for that, but what else would convince them? So what's interesting about this quotation, and we got lots of them, is people were actually pretty open with us. In fact, people thanked me often at the end. It was like cathartic because I gave them permission to say all these mean things about people that they actually felt released when they said it. But also there's this serious conflict within them about how they feel about other people, because they actually do believe that they should respect other people and not just, and it's one thing to not respect Donald Trump, of course, but it's another thing to not respect, half of the Americans. So there's another one. Most of my conversations with the people I'm having a problem with up to about a year and a half ago were all about sports, or about your family. And when elections started happening, it started becoming more political. A lot of people that I'm sitting here having a great time with on a Sunday afternoon watching American football, I'm not arguing politics with them. And so my relationship is, how do I kind of wrap my head around, like, do I still like this guy? And so, and obviously, they hang out, they watch sports together, and now all of a sudden it's politics, and he's just like, I don't want to be in the same room with you. And so this really begins the project. And we had a lot of I didn't bring a copy of the book. The book has more quotations like this, that there was a real struggle among our liberal participants, more among our liberal participants than among our conservative participants. Here's the book again. I'm going to go through it. This is very quickly the table of contents, which you can see. I mean, I will say about the book is that we each wrote part of almost every single chapter. It really was a joint project. Chapter 7 is the most political theory-ish, but nonetheless, well, no, I would say also chapter 1 as well, and then the whole conception of respect. So a lot of what happened, not a lot. In the beginning, a lot of the conversations we had was Beth would tell me, Jeff, we have to operationalize respect. We need an independent variable, we need a dependent variable, we need a way to measure it, right? And I'll get to that in a minute, right? So that kind of forces, it's interesting because it forces political theorists who sometimes like throw around vague words, social theorists, I assume, are the same, to actually be much more precise with what we mean, right? We can't just say, respect means, that you listen to somebody. Like, what does that mean to listen to somebody even, right? That it may seem obvious, or when political theorists write it, it's not actually obvious how you test it, how you think about it, and how you operational. So first of all, why is respect important? So Democrat theorists argue, and I think this is probably right or usually right, that respect is a key democratic value. It's fundamental to the dignity of every human being that we respect each other. And we see this often in everyday life, right? People want respect. When people don't respect them, they get angry about it. We see this in media when people are not showing respect, how angry they get. In terms of functioning of democracy, we think respect actually helps democracy function, right? That you have to collaborate and compromise with people, and respect is important to that. And when people don't respect one another, it becomes much harder. I did pull out this quotation while we're writing the book by Patrick Henry. You might remember Patrick Henry briefly, depending on how much you follow American politics. But when Kevin McCarthy was forced out and we had no Speaker of the House, he became Speaker of the House. He was the temporary Speaker of the House. If you guys remember this, he was the pro tem, and then he stepped down as that and said, "I'm done. I'm getting out. I'm not going to run for re-election again." Not the happiest moment in American politics, but nonetheless, it's perhaps this quotation, I think, is perhaps important, that he needed to respect the people I serve within the institution to get more done. And then after being Speaker for whatever it was, a month, he decided he had enough of Congress. So we do think respect is very important as a democratic value. It turns out that political scientists don't really study respect. So they study toleration and tolerance, but toleration is different than respect. So if I tolerate you, I might not like you, I might not even respect you, I put up with you, right? I'm not gonna expel you, I'm not gonna hurt you. I mean, toleration is certainly compatible with inequality of various kinds. And respect is a more robust version, and is more robust, and often tied to the idea of equality. So this first quotation is from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is now pretty widely used. And it's a very Kantian notion. It comes from Kant, and it's widely accepted in the political theory literature. But Emily McTernan, who's at UCL, argues, we think correctly, that people just say equal respect is important, but they don't really say much about it. I mean, when this project first began, I called Beth and I said, "So Beth, what are the studies about respect among political scientists?" And there was a long pause, and she says, "I don't know of any." And I said, "Well, that seems odd." She said, "Well, let me look." And she called me the next day and said, "I can't find anything." So there's a couple of things by a couple of German political scientists, but in general, respect has not been studied, which of course is great when you begin a new project as an academic, right? So it was another crystallizing moment for us to say, okay, now we know we're gonna. What's great about a project this is that no matter what you find, it's going to be publishable in some form, right? Which is a nice thing to have in front of you, right? So so that was an exciting moment. I thought it was odd that it wasn't studied, but I was certainly quite happy to learn that, as was Beth. Although I will say, the book took us a long time to just translation issues between us, and just to have this sort of, even though we're both in political science departments, it really is an interdisciplinary project, and to really kind of, think along those same lines, I think took some time. So the exception to this idea about respect and not being discussed is there is this idea called recognition respect, which comes from an article by a philosopher, Stephen Darwell, 1977, which is really a Kantian notion, which is that people are to be respected qua people. This is hard for empiricists to sort of take. We got some pushback on this, but this is that people as a person, the dignity of being a person means in part that others respect you. And so recognition respect is something that we study and that we use, and is pretty widely used by philosophers and by some political theorists. And so we kind of take that. But as I'll get to in a minute, the more interesting part, or not more interesting part, we develop a concept of civic respect, which is more complicated and more complex. Okay, study design, 27 focus groups. So we purposely wanted people who knew each other or at least had connections with other people in the room. We wanted people to feel comfortable talking. We didn't want a dynamic in a focus group where people felt like they couldn't disagree with others. And so people did disagree, but in a context of some agreement and some, like it was a safe place for people to talk. And so we wanted that. And also because we were asking specific questions about opposing partisans, we didn't want a mixed group. We didn't want people to be yelling at each other, you know, or to hate, just walk out, you know, we wanted a comfortable space. It was very hard to get conservatives to talk to us. We got a lot of no's. It was very easy to get, turns out if you're a college educated liberal, one of the things you like to do the most is talk. And so it was really easy. I mean, like we would get a group and then they would say, oh, do you want another one? I would say, sure. And they'd say, well, you know, let me talk to my husband because he has a men's group. And then the next day I would get a call and then there'd be another group. So the liberals were really easy to talk to, but conservatives don't trust academics. And that really came through. So it was really hard. We did eventually, I had to prove to them that I was safe to talk to. And I have a conservative student who's at a well-known university and he wrote something very nice about me on the web. And so I would literally send that to people and say, if you want to talk to John, I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you. I got a lot of no's from conservatives, just, you know, sorry, won't do it. A lot of people who, we had a survey for the focus groups, which we didn't really need in the end, and asked them all kinds of attitudinal questions. Beth just wanted to do this. And at one point, one of the conservatives called me up and said, we can't do this survey because you're not taking people as individuals. You're like, you know, treating them in different kinds of groups and you want our attitudes about different groups. And so I had to talk her through that. That was really hard. And then we did several surveys, 4 online surveys. We used mostly 3 of them in the study. And then of course we try to integrate empirical research with political theory, which is unusual. It's not often done. Although, you know, Tariq does that sometimes in his work, and a few other people do it, but probably not on the scale that we've done. So the book began, we've expanded the book, but one of the central ideas is what we call the liberal respect paradox. And that is because liberals, more than conservatives, I'll get to this in a minute, believe in the idea of respect. The differences are not as large as we had hoped they would be. But liberals believe in respect, particularly recognition respect, and yet they have a hard time granting respect when you ask them specifically about respecting people who voted for the other side, right? And so it's an abstract belief that when you get down to it, so this is what we call the respect paradox, right? And, you know, those 2 initial focus group quotations get to that, right? Which is that there's liberal struggle about it. Liberals, when you ask them about it, are quite aware that this is a struggle that they have, right? It's in them, and it is for them. And so this paradox comes through, and when they say, like, can I really hang out with this guy when all we're doing is watching sports together? And shouldn't I just be able to do that? But no, I really can't, because he believes he likes this other guy for president. So I'm gonna say why this is our survey data, and usually when we do this together, Beth we've actually only done this once together. Beth will explain this, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The bar on the left, of course, is the Democrats, and the one on the right. And you can see throughout that the differences are consistent but small, which is that Democrats believe in respect more. I will say in our focus groups, which of course is data that's much squishier than this data, when we asked people what they meant about equality, liberals were much more likely to say respect than the conservatives. And so we do think there's an intensity about respect among liberals, that is not, is there as much conservatives, but our survey data does not capture that. And so, our survey data just captures, some, modest difference. But this also shows that respect is in principle, right? We can see the first one is important that citizens respect each other. In principle is actually quite high, right? In principle, people believe in this. And so that is also, I think, an important part. But then when we ask people specifically, do you respect people who voted for the other side? And we ask them specifically in various ways to distinguish respect from toleration, as you can see from the first one, then the numbers start to decline and also are similar, right? I mean, we have not much distinction between conservatives and liberals. We do use Democrats and Republicans and conservatives and liberals interchangeably in the book. There's been so much party sorting, and I mean, these days there used to be conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans, but that's back in the ancient days, and yeah, that's like in the pre-times, not in the now times. So, the parties have sorted, as political scientists say, and so you can see that in the abstract, people do believe in respect. And when we ask them specifically, do you respect opposing partisans because they're fellow human beings? Even that doesn't really get, it's only 2/3 or so that say yes to that. So there you go. So as you can see, it is, and these are two different surveys. We asked the same question twice, and as you can see, the numbers are actually quite close. Right, we had, my colleagues did a survey. We stuck a question on their survey. Debunk survey, so this is the focus groups, which I coded with the help of with 3 of us that coded them. It was a whole big thing. That I learned how to code and got the software. We had long meetings with the 2 graduate students. 3 of us coded separately and then came together to see, to see the differences between us. So we coded it in 4 ways, right? Which is no struggle. I just respect other people, no matter what. I respect opposing partisans. And as you can see, conservatives rank among the focus groups is very high for conservatives. And then there's no struggle. I don't respect anyone who voted for Trump or anyone who voted for Clinton. And you can see the numbers there. And then there was this real struggle. Which is not the majority, but a significant minority of people who really struggled with this idea of respect. And as you can see, conservatives don't really have an internal struggle going on in them, whereas the liberals do. And then it's no struggle, it depends. It depends why. People gave various excuses and reasons. So as you can see, the angst, this is why there's more of a liberal respect paradox among liberals, or respect paradox among liberals and conservatives, which is a lot of angst among liberals and not amongst conservatives, at least from our focus groups, which we think is probably true generally. All right, so now I want to go on to civic respect. So political theorists will say often in their work is that it's very important to have mutual respect. And then they don't say much about what that means. It seems to mean something about listening to other people. But even listening to other people seems vague, right? Does that mean you're listening to them in person? Does that mean you're listening on a podcast? Does that mean you're reading? And so this is where Beth and I had a lot of conversations, right? She said, Jeff, we have to operationalize it. And I said, okay, I'm going to give you a definition. And so it really is several things. One is that you listen to and take seriously other people's ideas. What's important for us is that it can be interpersonal or impersonal. So it can be reading about them as just as much as talking to them. So I have a conservative brother and I can't talk to him about politics. But I can read, not what he writes, but I can read views that reflect his views without getting as angry. But somehow when it comes to my brother, it's like infuriating to me. And I don't think I'm an exception in that regard. I think I'm actually quite typical. So we think about it both in interpersonal, because if you're getting so angry, you're not listening, right? But you can read in a more calmer way. It's an acceptance of pluralism, and it means not engaging in political stereotyping. I'll get to that in a minute. So I do want to say that this doesn't mean you have to listen and take seriously other people's ideas all the time, right? It also means, like, if you have a settled view, there's a settled like, we don't think you have to listen to the other side about abortion every time it comes up. Like, if you have a settled view, there's a settled view out there. It doesn't mean listening repeatedly. It does mean if there's a new thing happening in the world, you can in fact listen to the other side, right? Or that you in fact ought to listen to the other side, and not just say the other side is wrong, without really listening and thinking about their reasons. So I think that's really the important part, is that when new things happen, new ideas, new events, you listen to and take seriously other people's ideas. So this is the idea of civic respect, which we do. And our argument here is that, unsurprisingly, the same thing with recognition, respect, is people say, and this is Americans, although I doubt it's much different in other parts, in many parts in Europe. I think this is probably familiar. People say that they believe in civic respect, but they don't. They just don't. They say it, but they don't. It's very hard. And so this becomes a problem. I'll get to this a little later. In some ways, for political theorists who just assume respect is part of a democratic polity, when actually you really can't assume it, because it's really hard to grant. And I'm going to say a little more. I'll be a little more normative at the end. And people do negatively stereotype people based on their party or vote choice, right? They think that because you voted for a Democrat or Republican, they assume that you know all their beliefs based on your vote choice. Okay, so this is this is part of one of the surveys, the 2019 survey. We asked people if they believe in civic respect, and you can see both Democrats and Republicans do. And then we asked them about listening, which is could be like impersonal, and then we asked them about engaging in a personal way. And you can see people are more willing to listen in an impersonal way than to engage in a personal way, right? But even so, you can see the numbers drop off, right? So once again, there's this abstract notion of, yes, we can, of course I believe this. And then when you push them a little bit and say, okay, but what about people who voted for Hillary Clinton? Or what about people who voted for Donald Trump? And then the numbers, and then will you actually willing to talk to them in the same room? And the numbers start to decline. So once again, we find this drop off. So interpersonal, personal, I guess I've already talked about this. So I don't need to say a whole lot more. So what we did, I don't know, in sociology. So we did this experimental design, which among political scientists, apparently you have to do experimental designs now. Does this sound familiar to some people in the room, right? So that's why we have to do an experiment. I said, okay, we'll do an experiment. So we did a couple. I helped design one of them. I actually didn't help design this one so much, but everyone has to do an experimental design. So I did the first one about a guy named Bob, and I let her do this one. But nonetheless, the results are interesting. It is odd to me that you have to do an experimental design, but it is the way the discipline. Is that the same true in sociology? I don't know, but it is where the discipline is right now. So we and hopefully I'm going to be able to describe this correctly. There were like 5 conditions, but basically I'm going to give you the 3. Which is that we asked people if they liked hiking, and if they did, after the survey, we asked if you would be willing to read more articles about hiking, or would you be willing to talk to someone about hiking? This is kind of the control. We figured hiking was neutral, that it wasn't a Democrat or Republican thing. And you can see that lots of people are willing to read more articles about hiking, but there is a drop off when it comes to talking with someone. And then we asked about political issues. I'll define them in a few minutes, but one was about what we call social justice issues. And these were randomly given, and one was about national solidarity issues. And we asked if you'd be willing to talk to someone who agreed with you or read articles with you. And you can see that, once again, articles are much higher than talking with someone. But then if you disagree with someone, you don't actually, only 22% are willing to either talk to you or even read an article, right? Even just read an article with someone who doesn't. So this was striking to us, that the difference actually collapses, right? There is no difference between the two, right? Like, no, it's just a big no among the majority of the population. And so the experimental design just kind of buttresses up the survey stuff. Although we were a little surprised. We actually thought this number, the 64%, would be higher, but I guess people don't. I mean, maybe if we asked them if it was, soccer or American football, maybe we should have asked about sports, then maybe that would have been a little higher than that number. But nonetheless, the experimental design does kind of intermesh and support the other work. Okay, so so people don't actually believe in engaging or even in having impersonal civic respect, in a way that they don't want to talk. Even impersonal, they don't want to do it. And then we come to political stereotyping. And here we ask if people who voted for whoever are the following. And you can see that in general, Clinton voters think worse of Trump voters than the reverse. There is a reasonable question. You can ask me this. I'm gonna preempt the question, I guess, is, do I think these results would hold up today to be the same? And I don't know is the answer. I mean, I don't know. Even in the last few years, things have gotten so much more toxic. I mean, hard to believe, but things have gotten more toxic even now. And Republicans have, what Trump has done in terms of making even Joe Biden, who's, basically a decent flawed but decent human being, into a horrible guy. So I don't know what the results would be, but nonetheless, in 2019, we see that people do stereotype, with Democrats stereotyping. Half of Clinton voters think Trump voters are racist and sexist. The interesting thing about this is, if you follow American politics, one of the things is that more people of color, particularly men of color, are moving toward Trump. Now, the majority are still Democrats, but the numbers moving are not trivial. It may be more of a gender divide happening than anything else. I am on a little bit on a limb here, but there is this movement, which I think is important to note. And so I'm going to get to this in a minute. I'm going to read these. And I know several people who voted for her because she was a woman, and then that was that. They were a one-topic voter, and that's one thing that mattered to them. I still hold that anyone who voted for him at their core is racist, because they couldn't listen to those words and not been racists. So we were really struck by these kind of sentiments, which came up often in the focus groups. And I'm gonna repeat myself in a minute with this, which is to say that, I mean, obviously during the focus groups, we didn't talk back, we didn't ask questions. But if I was there and I could, I would say, do you really think these Clinton voters who like the fact that she was a woman would have voted for Donald Trump if the Democrat nominee was a man? I mean, of course not, right? The fact that she was a woman was an added bonus, but that wasn't the only reason. And so this is how these stereotypes, and do you really think that if Donald Trump, I mean, of course people voted for Republicans because that's 40% of the population. And so there is this sort of like need to stereotype, or this desire to stereotype. And so what's striking about this are, you can see once again, Clinton voters think that Trump voters are uneducated, unintelligent, and And, one is, the lower number, the worse. So, once again, Clinton voters think worse of Trump voters. But the striking is this, that they're misled by the media and they follow they follow others. They don't act independently. And on these grounds, Clinton and Trump voters think the same. And I think what's striking about this and what this reveals about a lack of belief in pluralism is that 70% of Americans think that if opposing partisans were not misled by the media, they would think like them. And the only reason they're voting the way they are is because they're misled by them. They're not the only reason, one of the main reasons, as opposed to actually having different views. And this, we think, is a big problem in belief in pluralism, right? That you really think they're just one. And of course, unsurprisingly, I don't like Donald Trump, and I think that he has sprinkled a magic potion on so many people in America, right? Who can't see him for who he really is. But on my more sober moments, I realize 42 or 3% of the population are just not going to vote for a Democrat. They're just not going to, right? I mean, that's just the way the politics works. And many people will vote for Trump reluctantly, but they will still vote for him because of their hatred of Democrats. All right, so I am getting toward the end, another 5 minutes or so. So maybe 7 minutes, why are recognition and civic respect so hard to give? So we developed this idea of worldviews, or I don't think we developed this idea. We use this idea of worldviews, and we develop and test what we call the social justice worldview and the national solidarity worldview. So the social justice worldview is a view about structural injustice or structural racism, that you think this is replete in society, and that you think and that this worldview really orders much of what you think about the world. And then on the other hand, we have a national solidarity worldview. Let me look to the next slide. You have a national solidarity worldview, and this also orders your view of the world, right? And then I'm going to get to moralization, because it really is the moralization that matters. Well, let me say a word about the moralization as well, is that we were really surprised at the number of conservative voters who believe that social injustice exists, or that structural injustice exists. And it's actually quite high. I can't remember, 50 or 60%. I'll show you on the next slide. I would have guessed prior, 10% or 12%, something very low. And so why is it much higher? So many of them think, and I remember being at a focus group, mostly young people, which for me means under 40, and in California, but nonetheless conservatives in California. And they were talking about how the older generation is racist in ways that they found so appalling, right? But what they didn't do, well, there's two things, I think. One of them we don't test enough. They didn't believe that government could do much to change it, right? So they believe this is a problem, but unlike Democrats. And so, but what we look at is the moralization of these issues. So Democrats tend to moralize the issue of structural injustice, social injustice, saying this is the most important thing, right? So I may be channeling Democrat. I may be patriotic. I may believe in my country, but how people view their country, well, people are going to have different views, and that's okay, right? I'm not going to moralize that issue, but I am going to moralize structural injustice. So we do have, I hear my colleagues say this actually, we do have surveys that show that there's wide agreement among Americans on many issues. And our surveys show too, you can show it how there's wide agreement that social injustice is a problem. But liberals and conservatives moralize different issues, and that matters a lot. It's the moralization of the issue that explains the distinction. Because if you believe that structural injustice is one of the most pressing problems of the day, and you think that we have a collective responsibility to undermine social injustice, to work toward a just society, those people who oppose you are advocates of injustice. And that's a horrible thing. And it's very hard to respect someone who's an advocate of injustice. And so sometimes when I give a talk, people say, yes, I agree with that. But it's also a problem too. That's also a problem we think that we're pointing out. So, so you can see here, you know, we were, like I said, we were really struck by the numbers of Republicans who believe that social justice means helping groups that are worse off, even combating climate change, voting for officials. Yeah, I'm not sure if Republicans knew what they were saying when they agreed with that. And you can see that, you know, make sure America stays strong is higher for Republicans, Democrats. But once again, we do believe that it is the moralization of these issues that really explain the key differences among them. Some of these numbers are a little closer than we thought, but nonetheless, it is national solidarity that Republicans moralize. I don't think I have a, yes, we do. Yes. Right. This is the hardest one for me to explain, but I'm going to do it anyway. So, so the more you believe in, the light line is the Democrats. So the more you believe in social justice, the less you're going to, and that we have a collective responsibility for social justice, the less you believe in recognition, respect. And the same thing for national solidarity. So it is this idea that we have a responsibility to engage, that we have a collective responsibility to engage to in this political, for this political problem, for this political issue, that leads to a decline in respect. And this is where the moralization comes in. Okay, I'm gonna in the last 2 or 3 minutes, I'm gonna be a normative political theorist. So the first is that political theorists assume respect, and they assume that justice and respect go along easily. They think that living in a just world means everyone will respect one another. But if living in a just world means that you have a certain kind of view of equality, right, that is widely shared among academic political theorists, but not widely shared among half the population, right? You're making a big assumption, right? It works to say, to say in the political theory literature that everyone ought to respect one another, and then to go on and give a particular view of justice, is to not engage with the fact that many people disagree with your view of justice, right? And so the question becomes, how do you respect people with a different view of justice? And we think this is sorely lacking in the political theory literature. There is, you know, you get the egalitarian political theory, which is, I think, widely accepted, is a broadly assumed and accepted view. You know, there's a lot of arguments now. We show them in the book, that people have a responsibility to undermine structural injustice, that it is incumbent on them to do so. But what if 45% of the population disagree with you? You know, what do you do then? So we think political theorists have a choice. They either have to figure out how they can maintain respect, which we think is important for reasons which we articulated in the beginning, or articulated in the beginning of the presentation, or they have to say respect is simply a secondary value, that pursuing justice is more important, and that respect is less important. We think that's a dangerous move in a democratic society. So we do urge what I call an egalitarian pluralist view, what we call an egalitarian pluralist view, which is that we do recommend, or that we do realize that there are different values that people hold, and that how we balance these different values, that we all hold different values. I'm not going to give a defense or an explanation of pluralism so much, but how we define, that we recognize a plurality of values. And while we might make a certain one like equality central, even among us, those who believe in equality or egalitarianism in a robust way, even we have to make trade-offs among different values. And that if we recognize the tensions that we have to face in our own lives, we can also recognize that other people are going to disagree how they navigate those tensions. And ultimately, the end of the book is a plea for recognizing and accepting pluralism. We do think there are bounds. We don't think accepting and respecting people who disagree is boundless. And so our bounds, which I can explain later, are really within the democratic system. Those who don't believe in democracy, we don't think ought to, are kind of outside the bounds of respect, at least some of the time. But we do believe that political theorists generally and citizens also need to take pluralism seriously and not just give it lip service. I really think it needs to be pushed. That's it. Thanks. Questions? You want me to?
No, thank you, Jeff. That's great. Given us something very much to think about, the paradox of the situation, the finding. Maybe I just come here so I can see who wants to come in. So Terrell's got a question for you.
I'm Terrell Carver. I don't think we've met, but
Right, yeah. Yeah.
We certainly know all the same,
Yes.
same people.
Yes.
I think, well, it's a very clever project, and I'm in complete respect for all respect, sincerely, for all of that. And I think the conclusion that you got to about moralization is really, really interesting, particularly the way that you put it. That is, as you put it, moralization doesn't mean all of my values and how they're great. It means that your values over there are evil and the work of the devil, and therefore I just can't be in the same room with you. And that's in Rousseau. It's in the chapter on the small city state and the general will and the civic religion, where it says, and I think this is an illustration, not that he's right about everything, but he says, we cannot live as citizens with each other if some of us think the others are damned. Hence the civil religion, which is of course a swipe at the Catholic Church, etc., etc. So, and I think that's actually really powerful. So if you think that through, if your basic principle is the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms and there's many guns and the solution to guns is more guns, then that's kind of it. And the other way around, if you agree with me the social justice problem, my solution is more government action. That's clearly the work of the devil and the road to serfdom and tyranny and everything else like that. And that seems to me to describe actually very well, much better than pluralism, how this struggle is and where the struggle just doesn't work. So we don't have to go to other parts of the world that we might be eager to mention here, but that would seem to describe various situations, but normatively, do you have any ideas how to deal with that? Or does that help explain why you have got politics with your brother? Or...
Yeah, so, like we struggled about this, which is because we do recognize that talking politics, people you deeply disagree with, can be very difficult. And we don't wanna dismiss that. And so we do say that sometimes giving up on civic respect, particularly personal civic respect, is something that you just need to do in order to maintain recognition, respect. So I talk to my brother once a month or once every other month, and we talk about our family, and that's important to me. And I just avoid certain topics. And again, I'm not the exception there. And so I do think that's important. I think the other thing, which I don't think we say enough about in the book, is I think if we were to do more to recognize the tensions in our own lives, the struggle in our own lives about different values that we hold, we would be more open to understanding the complexities of some kinds of other, other views. I think, and I know American politics better than British politics. I think one of the problems we're facing, although maybe it's not different, is the way that politicians really use issues that divide people in a way that is, more than necessary. And I don't have a solution for that. I mean, it's easy to diagnose that problem, but certainly in America, the way one party in particular, uses certain kinds of issues to demonize the other side. And then people follow because that's what they hear, that's in the news. And that problem is just so, and we talk about in the book. I mean, partly we say people should watch sports more. And we don't say that like completely tongue in cheek, like we know from surveys, like the more you follow political news, particularly in this day and age, when you just get a news feed, the unhappier you are, right? And the less you follow politics, the happier you are. And I think there's a way in which politics and politics is kind of like this endorphin thing. Like they're saying us just to get us going, and we have that thrill of hatred, that is kind of thrilling in a way, I guess, right? But then doesn't really have good after effects. So, yeah.
John.
Yeah, thanks for that. The distinction between the national solidarity and the social justice, I'm curious how you arrived at that. Was that an empirical finding, or was that a kind of frame that you applied? But don't answer that, because then I don't get to ask the interesting part of the question, which is the question of collective responsibility, because I could also see that being a really important axis here, right, particularly with kind of Republican voters, where individual responsibility for social justice questions would be more important. So social justice could be important as an issue if framed as an individual responsibility as opposed to a collective responsibility. It doesn't work symmetrically the other way, right, but it does work in that way. So kind of pairing national solidarity with collective responsibility from a Republican perspective can dilute both of them because of the idea of collective responsibility, which is anathema to Republican kind of thinking on that. So
yeah.
How did you get to those categories?
Right.
And what would different categories tell you?
Right. So let me answer the second question first. And I'm going to be a little vague, but hopefully be able to answer. So we were surprised. We thought that there would be a bigger split among conservatives between individual responsibility and collective responsibility when it came into our national solidarity issues. But I think I just read too many libertarian political philosophers. Because this is one of the differences is that among political theorists, liberal political theorists and liberal citizens, the gap between them is very small. But in the academy, libertarianism among conservative political philosophers is actually quite big. And you can think of, for example, immigration, right? So, our libertarian friends are all like open borders, right? But among conservative voters, no. And so there's this bigger gap that I think I was misled by, at least not by the survey design, but by my expectations. And so the national solidarity view was stronger than we thought. We even asked a question, I don't think this is in the survey, about, like displaying a flag. And actually not that one was, I don't remember the results of that. But in general, the national solidarity view was more collective among Republicans and conservatives than we thought it was going to be. Which was surprising, like I thought. And, partly if you think about in America where the Republican Party, I think this is not something I thought about deeply in the book. I think when we think about populism doesn't necessarily track historical conservative political thought, right? Populism is not Edmund Burke or Michael Oakeshott. The populism is really powerful now among what used to be called conservative elements, across the Western world now. And so I think this populist thing has just changed the views. So your first question, the issues that we chose are not exhaustive. Like there may very well be, we got pushed by the reviewers. That's exactly this question. But of course, at that point, the surveys are done, you know, that's one of my colleagues who does survey work is, he said, Jeff, you'll know the survey you want to design after you've done your survey, and you've gotten all the results. So, you know, we did pick issues partly based on what we thought came up in our focus groups, partly based on reading conservative thinking, but there very well could be other issues, particularly on the conservative side, that you could put in there and you might find different results, but we don't think so. But yeah, we just chose them, chose issues that were big in America. Gun ownership, we wouldn't choose for Europe for sure.
But all the issues, did you then consolidate them into those two categories?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
right, so then
yeah,
these
we
are
made them
the
into one.
overarching categories
Yes.
contain the specific questions.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah, they're composite, yeah. Of questions. Yes.
Yeah. I see that Lucas put his hand up, so he has a question. Yeah, I'll bring him in a minute. But I just wanted to chip in with something which I think connects with the first two questions, and in particular, Terrell's question, because in a way it's about where you began, what you saw as your starting point. So, and the way that you talk about political theory is like, well, all political theorists are liberals. But they're not. Rousseau is not a liberal. Hegel was not a liberal. And Hegel had an understanding of respect, which was sufficiently different from Kant and from Stephen Darwin, because he had an understanding of recognition of people not just as moral persons, but as people that you have certain kinds of relationships with. And also that they themselves have a character, you know, a contextual character, an embedded self, which you in some ways relate to or part of, can also be hostile to, and so on. But if you like, the job of a political philosopher is to present the terms that can bring people together in a, I mean, this is one way of approaching it, where people already have certain kinds of embedded identities. And so it's not just a respect for their person in the abstract. So I mention that because if we then talk about equality within that kind of, let's call it a communitarian perspective, then yes, we're going to want to emphasize inclusivity, bringing people together so they can come to respect each other and cooperate together and so on, in the way that doesn't automatically follow from liberal individualism, where it might be just you respect their personhood, but you know, they go their way, you can go yours. So, I mean, in a way, it may be that it won't make a radical difference to where you end up, because your egalitarian pluralism fits a lot better with what we might call a contemporary, or say a Taylorian interpretation of Hegel, of Hegelian respect, as well as, you know, the Kantian moral dignity. So there are political theory positions that will actually match better where you want to end up. But the way that you put it is, well, if one begins as a liberal and then tests out public opinion with a certain kind of assumption, you realize that actually you need to go beyond that liberal framework and bring in some other important political perspectives.
Right, thanks. So a few things that's swirling in my head. So I do think, I mean, obviously you're right. There's many notions, you know, the history of political thought is very rich and varied. You know, we are situating ourselves among contemporary egalitarian political theory to some large degree. I mean, that's the audience. And which is more Kantian also than Hegelian. And you're, you know, I rarely mention Hegel in my work. So there are other conceptions of respect And I'm not gonna deny that. So one consumption of respect, which is different than what you're getting at, is what Darwell calls appraisal respect. So I might respect someone for their abilities as a tennis player, for example. And I'm respecting them for, which I think is probably important for conservatives. And now I think, Tarek, you're talking about respecting someone as part of an embedded community way. And, that could be interesting to test. We were really interested in getting to this notion of civic respect. And I would have to think harder about your question, about how to incorporate some questions about what I think you're referring to. And I think you're right. It would change the journey a little bit, but I would probably end up in the same place. And it's possible, we have a new project coming up, and so it might be that that's something for us to think about in the next project.
Yeah.
Good. Sorry to keep you waiting, Lucas, but you have the floor now.
Thank you. Well, very interesting. I think I agree with Terrell that your insight about the moral prioritization is very insightful. I come from the opposite direction from my colleagues because I'm an empiricist. I'm not a theorist. So yeah, I think you're going to find that my questions are perhaps less theoretically grounded. So the first question I have is how widespread this phenomenon is, and to what extent you think that matters, because I am someone actually who does study public opinion in the States, and I think we have a massive problem of demand effects and surveys, and increasingly we have a problem of all sorts of biases because our non-response rates are enormous. So it may be that the samples we are getting are extremely skewed and of people who are very politically motivated. So, do you actually think that for the majority of the population, they may say in surveys that they don't feel respect for people from the opposite party, but actually that doesn't really matter because they don't behave that way in their personal lives? Or maybe it doesn't really matter the proportion because it suffices that you have, say, 10% or 20% of the population who are really politically engaged, and that's a democratic problem normatively. So I'd be interested in hearing that.
Right, so it's certainly not everyone who doesn't respect, but it is, the numbers are large. So there's, I think, a couple of different parts to your question. So I'm obviously aware of non-response rates and what that means. And so partly we did 3 national surveys and we repeated some of the questions to kind of get us some confidence in the answers. We also looked at other people's surveys if they asked questions. So Pew, luckily for us, did a question about respect just before the 2016 election. I don't have that slide here, but their numbers match ours quite well. And so we've tried, and then my colleagues did the survey and they said, Jeff, do you have any questions for us? And I said, sure. And so we try to do multiple surveys. That's the only way we really can feel confident about the extent of the problem that we think we see. So we do think there's a large number of people that this affects.
Sorry, I actually had another question that I think is more interesting, which is, okay, you have this very interesting definition of civic respect. If I understood it correctly, you have to give some attention to what people with whom you disagree with. My question is then, what do you do with that respect? So suppose you go there, you read their opinion, you consider it, and you still think it's morally repugnant. What do you do with that?
Yeah, that will happen sometimes. There's no question, like the gun owner who wants his house full of machine guns, or I'm gonna understand why. I understand there's a distrust of government. I met some people who are survivalists. I understand they think the world's gonna go to pot and they want to be, ready for that moment. And yet I still find them dangerous. So, it is true that understanding doesn't mean necessarily the sympathy, but we do think understanding will sometimes lead to that, or it ought to. The other thing that we think understanding is that when you have atrophied views, you can't understand why people change their political party. So why are men of color moving over to the Republican Party? And if you don't understand their views at all, you can't understand that phenomena, and you can't understand what you might be able to do to engage them in a way to prevent that from happening, right? And so political stereotyping, I think, also puts blinders on people in a way that can undermine your own political goals, right? I mean, it may protect your purity as your thought process or as a political actor, but you may be harming your political goals, I think, in an important way. So I think understanding is really important. I mean, I'm struck, who's the Financial Times guy, John Paul Murdoch? Am I thinking of the right guy? Burns, maybe. I mean, he's done, I've read very briefly, some of the stuff about the gender gap in voting across the Western world is very striking and very important for us to know. And to just dismiss it, like these people are all X or all Y, is really, I think, a problem for us. So we have to understand why people are changing their voting behavior, if we want to achieve the goals that we have. For both sides, yes.
Yeah.
As a so-called young person below the age of 40, I use the internet every single day, the social media every single day. I use TikTok all the time.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I have two questions regarding like referencing that. To what extent do you think the internet mobilized opinions regarding loathing and respect?
Yeah.
And the second part is also, do you think the internet mobilized one more than the other?
Oh, yeah, well, more loathing than respect, is my guess. So, I'm not on TikTok except when my daughter, who's probably around your age, sends me something, and then I feel compelled. She did TikTok with me that got 100,000 views. I want to note that. Yes. But you can't find it anymore. Apparently it's gone. So I have a vague understanding of TikTok. I've avoided it for the normal, reasons, which is I don't want to get sucked into this kind of thing. But yes, I think people have their news feeds that tell them certain kinds of things, right? And tell them things that they want. We have confirmation bias, right? I mean, we know this from psychology. So it confirms your biases, it confirms what you want to hear. And you don't look at other people's views, or if you do, you just like make fun of them, or other people make fun of them. Or you find the worst characterization, like so Fox News takes the squad, these four, I guess it's more now, like they take the most extreme comments, put them on their newsfeed, and then say, this is the Democrats. And then the Democrats do the same thing for the Republicans. And that just feeds, people like to make fun of the other side. And so, yes, I do think it increases loathing and not respect. All the siloing that's been happening, both physically, has been mirrored through social media as well. There is, in America anyway, and one thing that's happening is that there is a bipartisan view that phones are bad for younger people. You're old enough to escape that. But for people younger than you, there is this view. I don't know what will happen. I doubt TikTok will get banned. Because TikTok's not the problem. I mean, if not TikTok, then something else, right? Instagram. But it's just one manifestation of the thing. It's not. TikTok may be a problem for other reasons. Thanks. Yeah.
You obviously have an interest in. Sorry about that.
Speaking of.
Stop by itself. Good. You obviously have an interest in whether gender and the trends, differential trends between men and women, and how they might be thinking of voting, are voting, and so on. You have an interest in that. And much earlier, you mentioned how some African Americans are surprisingly moving towards Trump, even though they're a small number of the total African Americans. It's still a surprising move. And actually, a much larger move is taking place amongst Hispanics. But the only variable, the table with any variable other than just Democrat, Republican that you showed us was educated, uneducated. college educated, uneducated. But were other variables at all interesting, significant?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the only thing that really came up, I'm pausing. I don't think we had enough African American responses to make claims. Which is, obviously a problem unless you oversample, and we didn't. There was not much of a gender difference. Women were slightly, there were times when we thought there was a difference. The biggest difference is that college educated conservatives are the most respectful. And I will just tell you one story that encapsulates it. I was with a bunch of Republicans, young Republicans, ages between 25 and 35. Mostly reasonable people, except for one who sticks out in my mind, but the rest were very, and one of them walked out and asked questions about respect, and they were all very nice and very respectful, except for the one. And he looks at me and he said, I play guitar in a band. And just shrug his shoulders. And, what he was saying is, half my friends are liberals, right? So if you're a college educated conservative, you're in a minority, and so either you decide to you limit your friendship circle to the small number of people, or, you're everyone's conservative friend. And so but the respect then goes one way, right? Because for liberals, you're the exception. You're like, oh yeah, he's my conservative friend. But for the conservative, you have a number of people that you are engaging with who disagree with you. So that was the most interesting variable to see. We didn't see a difference between men and women. I have become more interested in the gender difference just in the last year. Although we do talk a little bit about people of color moving over toward Trump. It's just what's striking about that, Tariq, which is post the book, as you know, like the book, it was a year and a half ago when we finished this, as you know how these things work. I'm just struck in the last few months about these opinion polls in the upcoming election. Which the numbers are small, as you say, but as you also know, as we talked about, the margins of victory in these particular states are also very small.
Terrell, you wanted to come back, did you?
Yeah, just quickly, this is a thought experiment, but I wonder about a focus group, particularly on those who are grieving about gun crime victims, and seeing how, if they still respect people. So and I mean, that's choosing a particular issue, but I'm trying to get at the obverse of moralization, that you're really the devil. And I mean, some of these issues are kind of policy issues, but I suppose I pick out the gun one because it actually does kill people quite rapidly. A lot of Americans are very upset about this up and down, and there's always an outcry in a group and demonstrations and speeches in Congress and things like that. I just wonder if that would be interesting to investigate, since you're so into focus groups now.
Right, yeah, I am. Yeah, so I'll tell you in a minute why I like the focus group. So, yeah, I mean, I think, I think there is a legitimate question about, like, when is it legitimate to moralize an issue? Certainly
In that way.
Yeah, and certainly gun control or lack of it, is certainly a reasonable one. I mean, it's, gun violence, the number of, I haven't read recently, but as of a couple of years ago, the number of people killed in America by guns has gone down. The number of mass shootings in America has gone up, which is why it seems so scary. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say about guns. It's hard to understand why you need a lot of these guns. So I like the focus groups because political theorists tend to be divorced from how people think about politics and how people think about democracy. And, I am in a for myself personally, I'm a full professor, I'm post tenure. I decided, well, I'm just going to do this project, but I found it really fascinating to hear what people think. And some of them were very thoughtful, and, it kind of made how I think about the world, less, sort of in this world with Rousseau and Hegel, and more with people who are actually thinking about things. And they liked it. They liked being asked these questions. They liked being, challenged to think about these issues. So it was altogether, I mean, the hardest thing was to not ask them questions. Like, I wanted to interject, but you really can't do that because then you're interrupting. You don't get through your focus groups. Sometimes I did at the end. I would turn off the recorder and say, if you have a few minutes, let's talk to you. But it was just interesting to hear people talk.
Yes, Lucas.
I'd like to hear a bit more, towards the end you mentioned the fact that you think there are boundaries and that's democratic value. So I'd like to hear a bit more of that, because I'm from Brazil, so obviously it's very hard for me to respect people who voted for Bolsonaro knowing that he tried a coup. And could that not also be the case in this? It might be very well the case in the States, right? That people can't respect people who voted for Trump precisely because they do not respect democracy, arguably.
Right.
So
Yeah. So I think actually many people who vote for Trump think that democracy is threatened by the Democrats. I mean, we can argue that that's silly and stupid, but they really do think that. They really think that this wokeness and whatever, I mean, they really have that belief. Obviously, I think they're wrong. Not obviously, I'll tell you, I think they're wrong. But the fact that belief is in fact out there. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that many people think that the elites in the country don't represent their views, and that they're not being represented. So what are the bounds? So I do think the bounds. Actually, Beth and I had long conversations about this, and this is the one thing which we had some disagreement on. So I do think the bounds are that if someone is clearly not believing in democracy, not believing in recognition, respect, then while we have to grant them recognition, respect, no matter what, we can pause on civic respect. But I also want to say that the pause on civic respect is a pause because people's political beliefs change, sometimes in response to their leaders, right? So I look forward to a post-Trump world where many of the voters who are attracted to Trump will find someone else who is, less interested in their own selves and more interested in sustaining, democracy. So another way to put it is that if Nikki Haley were to be the Republican nominee, many people voting for Trump would also vote for Nikki Haley, right? And I think we have to recognize that. That there's only a small percentage of people who are Trump or nobody. So part of civic respect is still understanding why they're voting, why are they so angry, why do they not believe in what we believe. I also want to recognize that. I mean, like many people, I do view Trump. I don't think Trump is going to destroy American democracy, but I do think I think he would be bad in many, many ways, and bad for some people in the United States in a very deep and harmful way. So I understand the desire to withhold civic respect, but again, we need to understand why we can't just say half the population, we don't need to understand them or care about them. I just don't think we can do that.
Yes, Chris.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I especially thank you for your opening comment because it told me I was under 50 because of my views. So nothing else.
Yeah, good, yeah, sure.
I think one of the broader problems in politics generally, not just what is this polarization.
Yeah.
People be this or that. I mean, there are Conservative MPs I've got a high regard of, and some Labour MPs I've got a high regard of, but there's a lot of them on both sides I don't. So it's very difficult for people like me to know who to vote for at the end of the day. That with Trump, I mean, I openly confess I am not a Trumpian. But I mean, when he made his comments during the COVID crisis on, I forget whether it was you either drink bleach or inject it, and there was a woman sitting behind him with her eyes and it's popping out of her head. I mean, that is so far off the board for me that whatever political opinion you've got, when people come out with that sort of stuff, I mean, I'm sure there are some people who would have agreed with him on this, but I mean, to me, it cannot be other than, tragically, appallingly and dangerously wrong. And on the gun issue, I did an analysis a few months ago about the number of deaths from gun crimes in Britain and America, and I took into account the population differential, and you're 500 times more likely to get killed with a gun in America than you are here. And I mean, that is so stark. I just cannot see how people can think that just sort of keeping hold of weapons per se is a very good thing. Anyway, there's a number of comments.
Yeah. So, we could focus on Trump, or we could focus on the phenomena of the rise of populism in general. It's very easy to point out many of the things that Trump has said or done as flawed and whatever. And you can go on TikTok, I'm sure, and see it all. But there is this rise of populism. There is this alienation of a lot of people toward modernity or toward democratic governments who feel left out, who feel not spoken for, who feel, what I'm urging is that we try to understand that, right. I'm not urging anyone to respect Donald Trump. I'm just not going to, nor Boris Johnson, who also, made stuff up,
But what's your explanation of populism or explanation?
Oh, yeah, so it's a little out of my league. And I invite everyone, I think there is an alienation going out there, right? I mean, people, I can tell you some of my worries, which also goes to gender, which is that, to some degree, and I don't know if this is true in Britain, you can tell me, my university is 60% female, and 40% male. Is that the same trend in Britain?
Roughly.
Yeah, and that's a problem, it's a problem, I think, on many grounds, right? That I don't say this because listen to me on gender, maybe I should, that the overrepresentation of men at the top, which is undoubtedly true, has blinded us to the overrepresentation of men at the bottom, right? And so we focus on, that thing at the top, it's just made, a couple of American universities have tried to establish, centers for men, because, sport group, whatever, and they've just been never got off the ground because they were just, what are you talking, why do men need this support, right? But, certain kinds of men, right, coming from certain kinds of background are alienated from elite institutions. So that's only a partial response to you, right? But we have an opioid crisis in America, there must be similar things going on in Britain and in Western Europe. So there's an alienation, a lack of feeling. I think in America, the decline of the labor movement is very important, and under people, that its role in American life was really important. It brought people together. It gave them a sense of respect and pride, right? You were part of something that was bigger than you, but also that protected you, that also, you were part of a movement of solidarity. And I think that decline has become very important. Well, the same thing is true here as well, right? To some degree. So, well, after the Thatcher and Reagan both, smashed unions.
But we're celebrating, if that's the right word, marking the 50th anniversary of the big miners' strike of 1984 at the moment, which was absolutely pivotal in what happened to trade unions thereafter.
Right. So I think, I don't think it's, I cannot prove this. I don't think it's accidental that we have the rise of populism after the decline of labor unions. I think that there's a relationship. If I had the wherewithal, I would show it to you somehow.
A lot of populism is to do with people wanting easy, simple answers to a lot of complex and very difficult questions and problems.
Right, yeah, to some degree, but it's also people who are alienated to some degree, right, yeah.
I think we've probably reached a territory that can be best discussed perhaps with a drink.
Yes.
And
we're definitely outside my expertise.
maybe we should do that, but thank thank Jeff in the traditional way first. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you all for the questions. Thanks.